The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello everyone, my name is Oak Mountain and I'm your host. Today I'll be speaking with Tyson Adams. Tyson Adams is a trauma-informed IFS men's coach, somatic body worker, and psychedelic facilitator. After spending 20 years addicted to pornography, Tyson has outgrown this 7 years ago and found his passion and purpose in helping other men reclaim and master their life force energy. He also co-facilitates men's work leadership intensives and works with couples experiencing intimacy challenges. When he's not working, you'll catch him on a rock wall or riding a slackline in sunny San Diego. This conversation might be triggering for some as we delve into pornography, masturbation, sexual abuse, and some of these heavier topics that don't often get discussed. It is a very rich conversation, and for those who are open and willing to listen with curiosity and compassion, I do believe you will find a great deal of value. Awesome. Well, brother, it's been, I would say, a long time coming, but a short time coming, and a very exciting one here. Thank you so much for being a part of this project. I would love to ask you the question I ask every guest at the start of the show. What is the last thing that made you smile?
Oh, wow. Well, I have a new partner in my life, and I am preparing to post about it. We met 2 months ago, and I wanted to run it by her before I posted it, and she was very touched by it. And so it felt really good to just hear her reflections on kind of the whole arc of our relational dynamic and how we met at a festival and where we're going. So, and she's flying in today for her birthday into San Diego, where I live, and we're just going to spend the next 4 days together, just having a beautiful time. So, yeah.
What richness awaits you. I'm very glad to hear that. Thank you for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
So our guests would have heard a little bit about you in the intro at the top of the show here. However, I'd love to showcase a little bit more of the story and the journey that brought you to the work that you're currently doing. So if you would, Tyson, please illuminate us how you came to be doing what you are now.
Yeah. Yeah. So my story started at 9. I was in a field with several friends, younger guys. Actually, I think they were a year older than me. And there was just a board on the ground, just a board. And we just lifted this board up, and there was a treasure trove of Playboys in the ground. And I remember, bending down going, what is this? And digging through, and I saw a Vanna White Playboy. And the reason why I picked that one is because my mom loved watching Wheel of Fortune. And I remember I opened this magazine up, and as soon as I, see this woman who I know from TV for the first time, I hit the deck, obviously went down to my knees and looked at this. And I had 2 thoughts that ran through my head. The first was, number one, I'm coming back here tomorrow, and I'm coming back alone. And number 2, I could get in a lot of trouble for this. This is not okay. And that actually began a 20-year porn addiction for me. Shortly thereafter, my hometown, I lived in Ephrata, Washington, very small town, actually, 5,000 people. But we were the first town in all of America to get fiber wire put underground. And so we went from literally no internet to high-speed internet. We didn't do that like AOL dial-up thing. We just had high-speed internet. And there was a program called Kazaa, and it was basically like a Napster or like a LimeWire, and you type it in, and there was no thumbnails back then. It was just what I call the lottery porn. You would just see something that you thought would be cool, whatever it might be, big tits, whatever it was, and then you would just click download, and then boom, this thing would just pop up on the screen. And that was the beginning of the beginning of my relational issues, ultimately, because that programming, now in reflection and doing so much work around this, I could see that those initial violent and too much, too fast, too soon stimulation created the frameworks for what I projected and expected my partners to be and or to behave like. And it caused a tremendous amount of pain in my life. Of course, my parents caught me, but I just denied it, ignored it, and then just took it back into magazines to stay out of that. And that was really the beginning of my my adolescence in terms of coming of age. That's definitely 12, 13, 14, and then kind of took a pause and had a girlfriend. But then the next piece to this is I went off to the University of Washington. So I went to the big city, into Seattle, joined a fraternity. I didn't know anything about fraternities, but my girlfriend from high school, her brother was in the fraternity, so he wanted me to join. And then when I joined, there was a porn chairman who was responsible for indexing all of the pornography from the genres to porn stars. And there was this sort of reigning joke every time we had a meeting, where there's 100 guys sitting in the basement, and they would joke around like, get off the damn internet. Like we can't do our homework. And everybody would just laugh. So I really grew up in the belly of the beast of the normalization of pornography and technology and the misogyny and the blackout and just that rape culture and sexual deviant culture. And just, in a big city where that was just very normalized. So yeah, that's a good place to start.
So I can relate strongly to that introduction to sexuality. One of the statistics that's most striking that it sounds like you and I are both a part of is that most boys are introduced to pornography, if not hardcore pornography, before the age of 11. Mm-hmm. And what's so startling about that is obviously our brains are not emotionally or even physiologically developed well enough to be able to comprehend what we're seeing, the impact that it might have on us in the immediate moment as well as long term. And so knowing now where you are and where I am, having done the types of work that we have done internally and with men across different age ranges and with different levels of disruption in their lives as a result of this, when did you realize, because you said it was a 20-year addiction, what was that turning point like from being deeply entrenched in the consumption of these types of materials to moving away and recognizing that there's an alternative path for you to explore your own sexuality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I came to pausing pornography and realizing I was very addicted, not by choice, but by force. I had a medical emergency. So basically I had used a spermicidal lubricant condom. And for whatever reason, it set off a chain of events through my penis and urethra and my whole pelvic floor. And it caused tremendous amounts of pain. I mean, I was peeing 25 times a day. It was too painful to masturbate. And it was terrifying. I mean, legitimately terrifying. So I had to go on an elimination diet. I lived in Laos in Southeast Asia during this time. I owned a coffee roaster and a cafe, and was running a philanthropic business, putting in water wells and hygiene programs in the jungle. So while I was over there living, this whole meltdown happened while I was living alone, because there was no Western people where I lived. So I was not only isolated, but I was alone. And I was in massive pain, and the doctors didn't know what it was. And so they thought it was a bacterial infection, but it wasn't. And so they gave me a bunch of antibiotics and antifungals, which tanked my testosterone levels and made me really sick. So in addition to the pain, I also had erectile dysfunction issues that I dealt with. I also had premature ejaculation issues and a number of other sort of just challenges within my physical body. And that was what basically forced me into doing a 30-day semen retention journey. Before it was trending or cool, or before I even knew what it was on the internet, there was just me in the jungle. I mean, this is like 13 years ago, something like that, or 12 years ago. And so while I was in that experience, I took a pause for a month. And in that journey, I realized that I had normalized living my life at a quarter tank. What I mean by that is that I had normalized living my life not having the energy to be able to get shit done, to have the focus and drive and flow to actually put things in order in my business. And when my life force started to, come back, all of a sudden I realized, like, wow, I was living my life at a quarter tank, and now I have all this energy, and I was highly productive and in much a better mood. And I was like, whoa, what is going on? But when I finally came out of that experience, I had, I wasn't watching porn, and I wasn't masturbating because I just couldn't. And that was the first time I'd ever not done it since I was 9. And this was, well, since I was 11. So I was 31 at the time. And I basically had this idea, which was, can I masturbate without watching porn, thinking about something pornographic, or thinking about an ex-girlfriend? Is it possible to actually just have an orgasm? And I was debating in my head, like, no way, that's impossible. And then I was like, well, maybe you can. And then I was like, no, I like these polarized parts inside of myself, right? And so finally I was like, all right, I'm going to just try it. And because my testosterone had come back to life, and I was still in pain, but I decided to do this. And so I just stared at the moon. And as I stared at the moon, I just started masturbating, and I just sort of channeled with the energy of the moon. And as the moon and I like locked, I ended up bringing myself into now what I know was my very first orgasm of my life. I mean, going from like a chew to like, and like literally having an ejaculatory, like full body orgasmic experience. And in that moment, I realized one thing. I was one orgasm away from the rest of my fucking life. And what I mean by that is I knew in that moment that I was never going to go back to that cheap thrill junk food shit, and that I must continue the path walking forward. And so therefore started reading books. When I moved out of Laos to San Diego, hired a therapist, started doing men's work, started doing psychedelic work, and just continued to put in the time and energy and effort to never going back to that way of being ever again. So I look at that dark night of the soul experience as a gift, even though it was absolutely terrifying. So, yeah.
Wow. To think that a celestial object played such a pivotal role in the transformation of your self-exploration in that way is remarkable, to say the least. I appreciate you sharing that. There's a couple directions that spark my interest in terms of our inquiry today. The first is perhaps maybe more broad and more cultural and less personal, which is to speak to the pervasive and maybe poisonous nature of current day pornography. And I'll expand a little bit before pitching a question to you, because in your story, you spoke to Playboys, right? And I was given 2 Playboys by an older brother. They were 1964 and 1967, vintage things, nothing compared to what most men are consuming nowadays, right? These were photographs of women in a garden, reading a book. And I'm like, they're nude, sure, but there's still some semblance of humanity that remained in that, although it is an expression of the commodification of sexuality. It's markedly different, and I think that there's something to be noted around that. When I was contemplating our conversation and how it might go, this idea of the commodification of sexuality arose quite starkly, given that you work with men in porn addiction and the reclamation of their sexual power and mindful masturbation and these things. What came to mind is that, they say that prostitution is the oldest job that there is, and that I wondered to myself whether or not that genuinely constitutes the commodification of sexuality. And my first instinct was it's not. In fact, prostitution is the commodification of intimacy. And I think that that's a really important distinction that underlies the chasm between mindful sexual exploration and evolution and this mindless consumptive and deterioration of male sexuality via pornography. And what I mean by this is that when we separate our sexuality from intimacy, we are unplugging an aspect that is innate in terms of its nourishing capacity. Like, we are sexual beings because we are meant to be intimate with one another. We have the ability to feel, to smell, to taste, and to feel pleasure because we do that with one another. We are social and exchanging in this way, and we grow and evolve in this way. And so the question that strikes me at present, and maybe it's a softball, I don't know, but it really is a genuine curiosity for me, is whether or not there is any sexual media that can be aligned with a conscious exploration of one's sexuality. Is it at all possible to engage with maybe lewd art, maybe boudoir photography, maybe some type of quote unquote conscious pornography in a way that is not deteriorating like we see with this epidemic of addiction?
Yeah. So when men come to me with porn addictions, what I often will ask them is I'll say, are you in a relationship? And if they are, or if they're not, it could be single man as well. But I'll say, if you like pornography, then roll your own, create your own, but don't call it porn, call it erotica, and don't upload it to the internet. Because once your image goes on the internet, you have no idea where it's going to go or how it's going to be consumed or how it's going to be commodified. It says, so it's not about the porn, it's about your relationship with the porn. So in this case, if you pull out a camera and record yourself making love to somebody or to yourself, and then you look back at it, you can learn a lot about who you are and how you're showing up as a lover. And it can be really great feedback for yourself. It can also help spark you into arousal later, but just be careful with it and do it mindfully and consensually, and ensuring that everybody is willing to participate in that. And so I can say from experience that can be a very healing, very beautiful, and very honoring thing to do. So I'm not anti-porn. I'm just be careful, be careful. And I guess for me, what I help men to understand is that there's two primary ways to relate to sexuality or masturbation, either way. One is to feel better, and one is to better feel. Over here, when it's to feel better, most of the time it's thinking your way to orgasm. And over here, it's feeling your way, right? And if we're using sex and masturbation as a means to feel better when we're sad or sick or bored or angry or, anything we don't want to feel, basically, if that's where we go, then any way of relating to porn or sexuality is a means to an end. And that means to an end is to get out, to bypass effectively the uncomfortable emotions or energies within the system. So I could make an argument, which is to say, if a man's using pornography to better feel, that there may be value in that. I'll give you a great example. Guys come to me with premature ejaculation issues. And so I say, all right, strip out the porn, like the high visualization porn, but there are some audio porn things that you can listen to. For example, there's one where women and men count down from 100 to 1. So as they're, masturbating, they're just counting down. And the whole aim is to elongate your ejaculatory response, making sure that you don't ejaculate before they do at the end. So that's a perfect example of using a pornographic material in a way that's actually helpful for your own capacity to feel and to become more an embodied lover. So that would be a good example of some of the things that I do that are maybe non-traditional, whereas other people that are coming from a religious background or coming from a, porn is evil or whatever, they wouldn't even suggest something like that. The other thing is I'm partnering with a woman named Emma Spiegler. She lives in the UK, and she does erotic mindful masturbation guided meditations. And so her and I are creating conscious masturbation. I'm creating the script, she's recording it, and then that we're going to give that to the guys so that when my clients come through, they can put something on and they can learn to touch themselves and be with their own bodies in ways that are new and unique that they've never explored before. So, yeah.
Brilliant. So what it sounds like to me is that there's some meaningful aspects to both the approach and the media that makes the difference that I was sort of questioning on. The first being sort of imbibed in your distinction between using masturbation and pornography to feel better versus to better feel. And one of the pieces that arose for me is the essence of presence, right? So much of our attention is taken out of the body on a daily basis when we are tuned into screens, just glued to these little rectangles all the time. They're a means of disassociation for many. And so when that is combined with a super stimulus like pornography, brief aside for listeners who don't know what a super stimulant is, you can imagine that sugar stimulates the system in a way that says, yes, please, more, please. Same with salt or any sort of relaxing touch, sunlight, exercise. These are stimulants that can enter into the body either through its own activity or through the outside. And something like a super stimulant would be heroin, cocaine, and including pornography. That's not a limited list, but these stimulate our nervous system in a way that is abnormal to what it is prepared to receive. And therefore, the consequences from a physiological perspective are unprecedented, we might say. Okay, so when we are bringing a focused presence, it almost seems like the media or the medium of stimulation has to be more subtle. Mm-hmm. And I think this is what you were speaking to in terms of the audio media, because maybe listeners know this, maybe they don't, but the brain, so much of our processing capacity is dedicated exclusively to visual processing. And so if we take that away, then the subtle signals of the body, of the nervous system, of all of these cells and these different nuances of the somatic realm become more perceptible because we have more consciousness, more presence, and more attention available to attend to them. So that was one piece that really stood out to me. The other thing that I thought was quite interesting is when we talk about feeling, I was introduced to an idea by Anya Rose in season 1, and she works in a similar realm as you, but particularly with women. Almost, I would say, a very interesting inverse or polar exploration that she and I had in that conversation. And one of the pieces she introduced to me was the distinction between feeling safe and feeling safely. And what this brought up in response to what you had shared is the propensity, or almost, man, I don't know if it's a propensity. I'll just put it this way. My experience as a man and working with men is that feeling the body is taboo. That being relaxed, exploring our own form by ourselves, enjoying and opening in this way that might be seen as more yin in the receptive or more feminine in that sense is off the table. Like, our job is to right to the point, here's what we're going to do, and that's all it is. It's very goal oriented. And so the transition that you've outlined here or introduced by the exploration of, say, the 100-to-1 meditations, slowing down intentionally, removing these visual medias, it's almost, I can imagine it might be confronting for some men, even in hearing this. Like, what do you mean I'm going to do this without a photo? What do you mean I'm going to do this without thinking about my ex? What do you mean I'm going to do this without watching a woman on screen? I'm going to be by myself. It's like, well, what if I don't find myself sexy? And that's the interesting key piece, I think, that underlies a lot of what we're talking about and the work that we're talking about, is that what I've noticed and what I found in my own journey is that learning to love my own eros, my own sexual essence, what it feels like to be a sexual being, not to have that demonized or exiled or condemned by any way as it had been in the past, but to go, this is an integral aspect of my own psychological, emotional, relational development. And the more that I can become familiar with this, the more space I can have for it in my body, not only the greater my capacity for pleasure, but the greater my capacity to connect with a woman, to be in relationship, in intimacy and sexual union. So I'll pass that off to you there.
I love it. Yeah. Where it takes me, I'll take it a step further, because you were speaking to this fact of men might be listening to this going, what do you mean that you're going to take away the images. And how do I even get there? I can't even get it. I can't even get an erection if I'm not looking at something, right? I've heard that a lot. And so the way that I do this with men is the step into mindful masturbation is understanding that most men's way of responding to sexuality is reactive. So it's like you're going through life and then you get stressed, you get overwhelmed, whatever. And we go back to when we were a teenager, right? When we go back to when we actually saw the pornography from the first time. And every boy had something going on in their life during that time. They were bullied. They were a pimply kid that no girls liked. They got broken up with. They didn't make the A team. They moved, schools. Their dog died. Whatever stresses happened. And then they found the porn and masturbation as a means to alleviate themselves at the end of the day or the end of the night or in the morning or in the shower or whenever. And now we're all grown up and we still relate in that same way, in this reactive way, which is, oh my gosh, I'm overwhelmed. I got triggered, and now I go and release as a way to move that energy, because it's annoying when it builds up too much. Like a lot of men feel some form of annoyance or bothersome, when it's in their system. So what I do is I help men as they move into mindful masturbation. What I say to them is put it in your calendar. And so when I did almost 3 years of celibacy, I would put it in on the full moon. So it was once a month on the full moon. Now, somebody my age at 40, you don't need to do it that much. It's about every 14 days is a good release schedule. You take your age and you times it by 0.35. So for me, 40 times 0.35, it's around 14 days. So for a while there, I was releasing on the new moon and the full moon and getting it into that sort of the moon cycles. But what I also do is I say, okay, once it's in your calendar as a scheduled appointment, therefore now it is mindful, because it's not reactive, it's proactive. Now, here's the map that I teach, and it's a question. And the question is this: if it were the last time you were going to masturbate and you knew you were going to die tomorrow, how would you do it differently than the way that you currently are doing it? And then go sit with that in meditation for a bit. And then pay attention to all of the possibilities if this is your last time. Now, some men joke around and they go, oh, I would just fucking watch some porn and go for it. Of course, that's a very typical way that men respond. But if you sit with it long enough, it's like, actually, maybe not. Maybe you would go about it with more intention, and you build your life from that portal. And so then what you focus in on is cleaning the bedroom, music, massage oil, massage guns, toys, clothing, scents, prayer, cycles, seasons, day, the time of the day. When I was really in mine, I would wake up, I would pray, I would go to the beach, jump in the ocean, I would come home, wouldn't work the whole day, I would slackline, I would journal, I would take a little microdose, I would go to the float tank. By the time I got home and I was ready to masturbate, I was so fucking excited. I was in like the best mood ever. And then when you move into that space and you're not trying to just rush the orgasm, you end up having these experiences where you actually stay for a while and you relate to your entire body as an erotic zone and not just your cock. And from that place of finally moving into exploring, you move into, oh, I can actually orgasm without ejaculating. Oh my gosh, what is this all about? And whoa, I can do some breath work. Whoa, what's this about? And then the long story to end this, and then I want to, kick it back to you is once a man, what I help men to do is once they've had their orgasm or their release, allow yourself to have that pleasure. It's yours. No secrecy, silence, and shame. Stay for a while. Satiate into it and be with it. Because the longer you satiate, the less you're going to need another round or another tomorrow or the next day. And then for me, it was always meditation. I would enter the deepest portals under the moon, having just released, and I would sit there for an hour in deep meditation, and all of this information would come through, and then I would journal it all, and I would literally build my life from those portals. I built my business. Ultimately I manifested my partner without effort, in the sense of seeing it as if it was already done before it was here. And then all of a sudden there she is and shows up. And so that's the portal of taking a reactive sexual experience into a proactive, mindful sex magic experience. And when a man makes that leap in consciousness, everything in life shifts, because the whole entirety of life becomes ritual, especially when it's sexuality. Yeah.
It was so potent. I think one of the pieces that I want to add that arose while I was listening, it bridges specifically off the word magic. And I think that a lot of men recognize that there's an obvious potency to the sperm, to the seed itself, because that's the element that goes and sparks life when it meets with the ovum. However, one thing that maybe isn't as obvious culturally, at least here in the West, is that when we are working in this sexual cultivation, when we are working with the pleasure body, when we're working with the sexual organs, we are working with a very specific kind of bioenergy. And we know that bioenergy exists. This is not a woo-woo term. We know about chi, we know about bioenergetics. This is well established. And that the quality of this bioenergy is not only fundamentally and universally creative and powerful, but it has the ability to reform us from the inside out. And this, I think, is what you're speaking to in terms of the transfiguration or the transmutation of sexual energy from, oh my God, I'm so tired and I just need to get off to be able to go to sleep. I need to feel just a semblance of pleasure to make my day okay. Shifting from that into, what is it like to feel loving ecstasy in my body, by myself, for myself, directed at nothing other than communion with this holy vessel that we call the body. And like, that seems like a pretty massive gap to bridge, you know? And I think that some of the steps along the way that I might put forward, and, you know, let me know if I'm missing a couple rungs on the ladder here, is recognizing where that shame and silence has come in and exiled aspects of our own sexuality. Maybe it's, you know, I can't be the pursuer because I'm dangerous. Maybe I can't express attraction because I'm going to be perceived as a pervert, or, you know, something like this, some sort of shame on that. Maybe masturbation without pornography means I'm gay, or, you know, if I enjoy touching myself, there's all sorts of random, unintegrated, and frankly, if I'm being fair, stupid things that are floating around inside the male psychosexual ethos that serve only to block the capacity for this type of sexual integration and maturation. And I want to bridge one other piece and to continue, is that to say the integration of your sexuality as a man is non-distinct from progress in becoming a better man.
Yeah.
Like, it's not something that's separate. You need to be able to understand, to know, to feel, to love, to sense, and to move that energy with a degree of familiarity if you hope to claim kingdom in your life, truly.
Yeah.
And so recognizing that as a potential, recognizing the blocks, shame being the first one, recognizing the habits, recognizing the why. Why is it that I step into this? Why is it that I reach for pornography? Why is it that I reach to masturbate when I'm tired, sick, annoyed, frustrated, what have you? And then starting to break down those barriers in the story. I can feel. I love feeling. It's okay to bring this part in. In fact, it's doing good, not only for me, but I'm a better man when I am cultivating intentionally this energy that would otherwise be subconscious, that would otherwise be reactive and almost feral in its expression. So I think that those are really, really key pieces. How does that land for you, Tyson?
Yeah. I mean, it lands as truth in my body. And I think where it takes me is, if you're out there and you're sitting there and you're thinking to yourself, well, how do I go on this journey? I have a ton of sexual shame and I'm in secrecy and silence all the time. Well, I'll say two things. First is, how you masturbate is indicative of how you will show up as a lover. So if you want to become a better lover and you want to either attract a partner or deepen into orgasmic bliss with someone, then these are the practices that you can begin to work through and work on in order to manifest that reality. And then the second piece is for the shame. 99% of the guys that find me, I ask them the same two questions. One, did you have any elder male guidance coming of age in the area of sex to talk to you about this stuff? No. The answer is no. And then the second question, did you watch pornography before you actually had, an actual human partner? And 99% of the time, it's yes. So a lot of men will be unconsciously blaming themselves for their porn addiction, sex addiction, premature ejaculation, performance anxiety, or sexual shame, or whatever. And it's not a you or me or any individual man's problem. This is a much bigger collective cultural problem that is, spanning for thousands of years through all of this religious indoctrination and shame and sin. Just 100+ years ago, they were putting devices on teenage boys' penises so that they didn't masturbate at night. It's like, what the hell? So we're coming out of this repression, and then the porn hit, and it was like, it just popped so deeply. And going back to the commercialization piece, why I think it's important to think about it this way is like, porn companies don't see us as anything but an IP address. They don't see us as a name, a face, an age. They don't care about our grades or our partner, our religious beliefs, or anything. They only care about your fat finger hitting the ad that they're serving you. And if you click that ad, they get paid. And so the only sane thing to do if you're out there and you're suffering from porn addiction or secrecy silence in this sort of way is to say, like, no, to what they're doing to you. Because it's a parasite, but we become the willing host every time we log in. And there's no shortcut to that. There is definitely the masculine needing to find their unbridled and holy fuck no with that edginess of that sort of power. But as we say that no, we can't even imagine a new way. And so this is the conversation that you and I are having about what is that new way? Well, that new way is shifting out of that way to a whole other form of consciousness. It's not just this party trick to be the best lover and to make sure that she, has 6 orgasms. That's not what this is about. It's a fundamental shift in consciousness, and states of consciousness don't imply spiritual development, but they can. Sometimes when we break through to a state of consciousness, let's say your first orgasm without porn, that does kickstart the spiritual development in ways that can be profound. So that's the invitation that we're really speaking to here, guys. And like, I just love the things that you were sharing, because I feel like you're equally in awareness of the importance of this work, and how there is no more important work. This fundamentally changes everything in who you are and how you show up as a man in this world. So yeah, that was a little more than I thought I was going to say, but there we go.
That's awesome. It sounds like a perfect place to take a short break, and we'll come back with the second half of the show. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about just how you can help this show grow into the future. Did you know that we have an Instagram, a YouTube, and a Patreon? Probably. But if you're listening on YouTube, like many of you are, I would invite you to subscribe, to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any questions or maybe guests that you want me to interview. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other podcast platform, then please take this moment to rate the show. All of these actions go a long way to helping the Smiling Human podcast reach more people and grow into the future. Thank you so much. Okay, Tyson, we are now back for the second half of the show, which starts off with a section called the Question of the Week. For new listeners, this is where I invite our guests to bring forward an inquiry of their own, something that's meaningful to them that they want to share with the audience, or that maybe they think I could share some insight on. So it's one of my favorite parts. I'd love to know, Tyson, what have you brought for us this week?
Yeah. So what I feel most curious about is I want to know a little bit more about uh, some of your teachers. Who are the masculine elders that you anchor to in relationship to this particular topic? And why is this intersection of masculinity and or men's work and this sexual piece, why is that so important? Why do you why why is that so important for you? And the reason why I'm asking that is because I've found to be true that most men's work leaves sex at the door. And here we are having a conversation about masculinity and men's work and sexuality, which is often not, they're separated. So what has led you to making this such an important part of your life?
Powerful questions for a powerful conversation, no doubt.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of elders, it's a very interesting one. They appear, at least in my mind, to be a little disparate because I try to pull from a variety of sources, a variety of lineages, we might say. The work of Robert Bly in Iron John has been a large piece, not that I knew him personally.
Mm-hmm.
King, Warrior, Magician, Lover by Gillette and Moore, that was a large piece as well. David Data and his work around sexuality was a piece that started off my men's work journey in a meaningful way. I would say too, in terms of the broader aspect, not exclusively towards sexuality, thinkers like forgetting his name right now. That's too bad. One of them being Jordan Peterson and his work in the 12 Rules for Life and 12 More Rules for Life. These psychological pieces, or these men who are willing to talk about what it means to be a man, asking these questions, looking back into history, looking into themselves, and offering maybe not the most perfect answers, but answers, meaningful answers for me to pick up, turn around in my own brain, feel into in my own body, and to explore what it's like to try them on as a man. Can I find these pieces in myself? Can I find what it's like to live as the king, live as the warrior, live as the magician, live as the lover, and to then find the mechanisms of merger and fluidity between them. I would also mention Mantak Chia, his work around sacred sexuality, the multi-orgasmic man, the cultivating male sexual energy in the Tao of Love. Those are really, really potent ones. So those would be the elders. And it's funny because they're all books that I've read. You know, I haven't really spent time in circles with elders who have taught on these types of things. And I have turned, as many millennials do, or many of the digital natives now, towards the internet, towards video, towards these types of resources, because culturally we have lost a lot of that lineage. So that would be the first aspect. And to tie that into why the sexual piece is so important, there's a great depth to that, I would say. On the broad level, I recognize now that sexuality is an innate aspect of all humanity, and that when it is exiled or demonized or, you know, pardon the pun, but castrated away, that we actually are completely sapping our potential for evolution on the personal, social, and cultural levels, that there's a lack of integration there. But how I came to this was I have suffered abuse, sexual abuse growing up. I was exposed to pornography at a very, very young age and was punished for that. And as a result, my complex relationship, and the trauma was complex over a number of years, generated a habit, generated a quality of sexual expression and sexual exploration that was toxic, that was wounded, that was disembodied or dissociative, objectifying, and completely disconnected from my heart. On top of that, it was completely covered in shame. I had ingested and digested the sense that my own masculine sexuality in all of its expression, from the tender to the fierce to the go get it kind of initiatory energy, was not wanted. I was shown this by my peers. I was shown this by my family. I was shown this by my caregivers and all sorts of people who encountered the myriad wounded expressions of my sexuality through adolescence. And where that left me was broken, to say the least, completely disassociated from my feeling body. And I mean that not just in the sense of being able to feel, but I honestly, Tyson, when I was 20, I thought I might be a sociopath. I could not reckon why it mattered how other people felt. And, I don't feel that way anymore. I've gone through a great deal of healing. But what I realized is that this exile of the 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old parts of myself meant that feeling, emotion, eros, excitement, expression, exploration, curiosity of the body was a no-go, not safe. And that it stayed small, it stayed underdeveloped, and it stayed tucked and wrapped away in this secrecy and silence. And it wasn't until I was 22, I think, in and around, that I had a very profound experience in the presence of what I would describe as a medicine woman, a medicine holder. She's a family member of mine, genuinely. She's a cousin. And this was after one of my more major spiritual experiences that I've talked about on other podcasts. You can check it out there. I've talked about it in season 1 as well. But essentially, I was sitting there and no word of a lie, and you can have a chuckle at this, maybe holding a crystal ball, sitting on this couch, surrounded by all of these other sort of medicine artifacts. And my body began to tremble, like uncontrollably tremble. And I didn't know what was going on. I was like, something's happening. I don't know what's happening. And bless her heart, she just said, it's okay. Let it happen. You're here. You're in my home. Like, we're safe. This is family. Let it happen. And what happened was all that had been repressed in terms of the story came out. And it came out languaged. It came out in tremors. It came out in tears. It came out in just absolute shattering of my reality, because I was confronted with the reality of what had happened. And I remember this moment so fondly and so tenderly. It might sound funny to say fondly, but I was held by her and her husband in universal love. They opened their arms and they just held me as I wept and wept and wept and wept and wept. And she said to me, it's not your fault. Repeat after me. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. It's not my fault. And I was able to in that moment of cracking open, just be completely held in unquestioning, non-judgmental love, and to be fed that medicine. This led, is sort of a longer story. We tapped into a deep well here. This led to me stopping all sexual engagement. I was in a partnership at the time, and I explained to her what happened, and I told her what had come up and what I'd realized and the trauma that I'd gone through, and that I needed to stop having sex, because everything that I was doing or had been doing in some way was related to this initial trauma. I was playing it out in different ways. And so I entered into periods of celibacy. This is where I stopped consuming pornography, and just completely took the roster, took the inventory of my life, my sexuality, what it meant to be a sexual being. And I was just starting men's work around the same time. And what this did is I started to see an alternative path. It wasn't just what I was shown. It wasn't just what I had been indoctrinated into through the exposure to pornography and these traumatic events, but one could be a man, one could be sexual, and one could be safe. And that was new. And so the reason why this sexual element is so important is because I know for myself that I harmed myself and others, that I kept deeply meaningful and powerful aspects of my being, of my soul, away from myself and the world at great cost because of this. And then I see other men suffering the same fate. And so it's important because there is no distinction between a mature masculine man and one who has integrated the wholeness of his sexuality. And we need more integrated, mature men in this society more than ever. So
Hmm.
I'll pause there and pass it back to you.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that story. And my hand was coming to my heart a couple of times during that, just to acknowledge the gravity of what you shared and the confrontation of something that is pushed into the shadow because of necessity and because of silent witnesses or whatever it was that your experience was, and then all of a sudden to have that come flooding through, and to have words and shakes and emotions, and then fortunately to be held, with the love of your cousin and her partner, and then also just this crystal. And so when I think about those moments, or when I think about those types of moments that men have, life is never the same after that, because when we finally can actually say, yes, this did happen to me, and because this happened to me, I did this, this, and this, and I am no longer willing to push that aside, and I'm going to take full ownership and accountability. And then you come through that portal, stepping back in your relational sense, stepping back from the porn, beginning the process of doing this work. And then now you're through that portal, and now you can look back and see, like, oh my gosh, there are so many men who are still suffering, who are still in that uh, cycle of eroticizing their wounding and reenacting their own trauma stories and their own pornography, too much, too fast, too soon. And so I can see why this conversation and the conversations that you have with the other men that you interview and women that you interview are in direct connection and in direct participation with the young boy in you who desperately needed safety and who didn't have it, and therefore had these things happen. So it's like, these are the type of conversations that both heal our own inner boy, but also for any of the boys that are out there listening and little girls that are listening, to take the necessary steps, because through that courage becomes this new life that you and I are obviously are living, and we're having a very sober conversation about what it takes, and why it's worth doing this work. So yeah, thank you for sharing so vulnerably.
No, thank you for the invitation and the receptivity, Tyson. The word that comes to heart is liberation, that there's a very real shackling culturally, psychologically, emotionally, that is so commonplace. And
Mm-hmm.
what I think I would love to bridge to from this understanding of shackling and the necessity and potency and goodness of making this kinds of transition is, maybe men listening here, and I hope this is true, period. Maybe there are men out there that are hearing this and are feeling that rising energy or the confrontation with pieces of their own sexuality, pieces of their own exploration, where it's like, this is not really full. I am on the quarter tank. I am sort of limiting my expression, limiting my potency, limiting my sensuality, limiting my creativity. And obviously, there's an opportunity to work with men like you. However, I want to know, Tyson, what's one first step that a man can take to shift this kind of habituated and conditioned relationship to masturbation, pornography, and their sexuality into something that is more integrated, more holistic, we might say, more liberated?
Yeah. So the first step is awareness, which is just admitting to yourself, I have a problem, I have a challenge, right? Second step is um, to share that with somebody, to share it with somebody who uh, isn't going to shame you or reject you in any way for whatever it is that you're struggling with. And if you don't have somebody out there who is that, then there are ways that you can still do that. You can also write your whole story out, just get it out of your mind and down onto some pages. And then once you've shared it, the next step is to ask for help. A lot of men don't possess the capacity to say, I need help, or I need your help. Will you please help me? That's seen as a very difficult developmental task for men that have a lot of sexual shame and a lot of secrecy, especially if there's abuse. I also had sexual abuse as a boy. My step-grandfather molested me when I was a child. And so there are things that we know, and then there are things that we don't know. And for a very long time, I was in a similar situation to you, it sounds like, which is that I didn't know. I thought that it had happened to people in my family, but I didn't think it had happened to me. Inside of a psychedelic journey, ayahuasca, it was revealed what actually happened. So, point being, sometimes men don't take action because they don't know what is true and what is not true. And so what I would say is it took me hundreds of psychedelic journeys and 8 years of therapy and men's work in order for me to even get to the place of addressing it head on and bringing it out of the shadow and into the light. So if you're out there and you don't really know what happened, that's okay. That doesn't necessarily mean that you can't take a step forward. And then there's more tangible things that you can do. I work a lot with massage guns. I'm a massage therapist, so I always have my clients buy massage guns and working out the root of the body down through the pelvic floor, underneath the balls, the anus, the insides of the legs, and just and just purging all of that energy out of the system. It can feel incredible, and it's very helpful to move through urges. And then the last thing that I'll share is a practice that I take people through. I'm running a semen retention container right now. There's 77 guys in there, and one of the first steps is to burn the boats, which is to go on your computer, your devices, your text messages, and to delete all of the pornographic material and don't look at it again. Just get rid of it. Start from scratch. Because if you're wanting to be present with your current lover, if you're looking to attract a future lover, we have to click Control Alt Delete on our past, because those are energetics that are keeping us stuck in a lower vibrational frequency and a lower energy from a place of living in the past and not actually moving forward in our development. So those are some different things to do.
Yeah. Excellent. I appreciate you articulating some actionable steps for the brothers out there. One meaningful piece that arose that I think is underlying what you shared and really cements the necessity and the encouragement for me, and hopefully for other men, to explore this kind of work is, I won't say it in Latin, but it's a quote from Carl Jung that translates roughly to, "In the filth it will be found." And the way that this is applied in his work is to say that that which you most want to find will be found where you least want to look. It's the idea that it's the right dosage of the poison that cures. And understanding that these types of woundings, these types of shadow habits or neglected aspects of ourselves actually contain within them a great medicine, not only for ourselves, yes, but also for our relationships, for the women in our life, for the men in our life, our brothers, our children. Because what I've noticed in my own journey, and I wonder if this is true for you as well, is that when all of those vines unhooked themselves and unraveled around how to approach sexuality, how to touch another's body, what it meant to receive, what the whole point, quote unquote, of sexual exploration was, I received feedback from partners that said, I feel so safe. I feel like it's okay. I can be open. There's this energy in you that beckons forward this surrender from me. And I think the only way that I was able to uncover that was by knowing what it was like to have received the opposite, this sort of predatory, penetrative violence, to have perpetrated that to my own degree, and then understand the opposite, understand softness, understand presence, understand tender space holding, and what it means to embody willing, open receptivity to consent and the exploration of the ebb and flow of the moment. And so, to the brothers listening, it's like, it might be bad where you're at or where you've been, but there is a light inside of that when you're willing to have the courage to step forward into it, to discover, to uncover, to unravel, and to feel into it all the way. You could never guess the value and virtue that's hidden in those shadows. Just wanted to add that last piece.
Absolutely. And what comes up for me when I hear that is something that I did in college, that I felt I would take to the grave. You know, there are things that we do that were like, nobody will ever know that I did that thing. And that ended up being the portal with my therapist early on in year one, where when I shared it and received his tears of empathy and helping me to connect back to how my act was in connection to the way in which I had to be there for my mother when she was very sick as a young boy, and helping me to connect the dots that certain behaviors are a product of certain environmental situations and developmental traumas that we go through when we were young. And so understanding that when we don't have to hold in our nervous system, psyches, and souls the gravity of some of the things that have been done to us, and that we have done to others, it is really light in your body. It feels really good to exist in your body. You feel safe, you feel home, you feel secure, you feel present, you feel humbly proud, and you're in flow. And then you fall out of flow, and you know when you've fallen out of flow. You're not stumbling, and you reach flow for a moment or two or a day, and then you fall out, or a few hours, right? And so that's why it's worth it, is just that you can get to this place where you're in divine connection with the all, and you notice when you fall out. And that's the privilege of doing this work, even though it's mucky. But you're right, in the filth is where you discover your greatest gifts often as well.
And for the brothers out there who are inspired and yearning to discover the greater gifts enwrapped in their own sexuality and to begin this journey, where can they find you, Tyson? How can they get in touch?
Yeah, my website's not quite done yet, so just on Facebook and Instagram for now. So Tyson Adams with 2 underscores on Instagram, and then Tyson Adams on Facebook. And just follow along, DM me. People reach out, having heard me on podcasts all the time, and I love hearing that. I always ask, which podcast was it? What did I say that landed for you? And then from there, the conversation opens. And so it's very fun for me to hear the impact of these very open, very real, very honest conversations that are not really being had very often. So.
Excellent. And of course, as always, all of that information will be present in the video description and the show notes. Tyson, thank you so much for the vulnerable, powerful, and insightful offering that you bring to the world, and that which you brought to this conversation. I feel seen, I feel touched, and I feel honored to have the opportunity to showcase this conversation with the world. So thank you, brother.
Yeah. Thank you, Oak. Appreciate it.
And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you can like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app, all of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.